This is my story. I appeared to lose everything in court and let my husband believe he had won. In silence, I gathered proof of his crimes. When federal agents arrived, the truth exploded and I reclaimed my power in my life. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe. Get ready for real emotional and thrilling stories from Black adults that will keep you hooked till the end. My name is Naya Rivers. Silence has a sound dot. It's the noise you hear when someone believes they've already won. That sound filled the room the night Coleman Hart told me he wanted a divorce. He didn't hesitate, didn't stumble over his words. He spoke like a man reading a script he had memorized months ago. The dining room light reflected off the polished table as he slid a thick folder toward me. Papers neatly stacked. Tabs labeled. Decisions already made. I want the house, he said calmly, the cars, and Rivers Cafe. Every word landed carefully, like a chess move. I didn't react. I watched his hands, instead steady, confident, untouched by doubt. Hands that once held mine across that same table. Hands that now rested easily beside a folder designed to erase. Me, he waited for tears, for questions, for resistance. I gave him nothing. My silence unsettled him at first. I could tell. His eyes searched my face, looking for cracks. When he didn't find any, his posture relaxed. He mistook my stillness for shock. That was his mistake. Because in that moment, something inside me sharpened. Not pain focus. People don't demand everything unless they're hiding something. I finally nodded. Just once, if that's what you want, I said quietly. Relief flashed across his face. Too fast, too practiced, like a man stepping away from a fire he started long ago. That night, Coleman slept easily. I didn't doubt at 2:17 a.m. I sat alone in the kitchen, the house humming softly around me. I opened my laptop and logged into the cafe's financial system. I told myself I was only looking for reassurance. Proof that I was imagining things. The numbers appeared normal at first. Then I looked closer. Transfers without explanations. Vendor. Names I didn't recognize. Payments are split into amounts just small enough not to raise alarms. It wasn't chaos, it was organized. Intentional. My pulse slowed instead of racing. Fear would have been easier. Fear clouds judgment. This required clarity. I followed the trail quietly. Every file I opened felt like stepping deeper into a locked room I hadn't known existed. Dates lined up too perfectly. Amounts repeated too. Precisely. This wasn't mismanagement. It was theft. I closed the laptop and sat back, listening to the refrigerator hum. Upstairs, Coleman turned in his sleep. I wondered how long he believed I would never look. That question haunted me more than the betrayal. The next morning, life continued as usual. I packed lunches, tied shoelaces, smiled for our children. Coleman drank his coffee, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world was out of place. He kissed my cheek before leaving. I didn't flinch. Over the next week, I became quieter, more agreeable. I let him talk. Let him explain how smooth the divorce would be if I were to cooperate. How lawyers were unnecessary. How everything would be easier if I trusted him. Trust. The word felt heavy in my chest. At night, I worked in pieces. Never too long, never in patterns. I copied files, took screenshots. Not enough to alert anyone, but enough to protect myself. I began to notice something else. Fear. Not mine. His. It appeared in the smallest ways. A sudden change in tone when I mentioned the cafe. The way his jaw tightened when I asked casual questions. The way he checked his phone more often. Coleman wasn't just leaving, he was running, and whatever he was running from had numbers attached to it. That was when I understood the truth. My silence, WSN single quotes to weakness. Was camouflage. I wasn't losing my marriage. I was stepping into a game he didn't know I knew how to play. And the most dangerous move in any game? Letting your opponent believe you've already lost. This was only the beginning. Asterisk. Part 2. The numbers were screaming. Numbers don't lie. People do. I learned that late one night. Sitting alone at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room. Coleman was asleep upstairs, breathing evenly, unaware that the foundation beneath him was starting to crack. At first, the accounts looked clean, too clean. The kind of tidy that makes you uneasy once you've lived long enough to recognize it. Rivers Cafe had always been messy in the honest way. Small inconsistencies, last-minute adjustments. Handwritten notes to explain the chaos of running a chaos of running a handwritten notes to explain the notes to explain the chaos of explain the chaos of running a chaos of running a family business. This wasn't that. This was precision. I started with the monthly summaries. Revenue matched expectations. Expenses appeared reasonable. But something felt off, like a song played in the wrong key. I drilled deeper, clicking through layers Coleman never thought I'd touch. That's when I saw gaps, small at first. A few $100s here. A few thousand there. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms. But they repeated over and over again, same dates. Same timing. Always just under the threshold that would raise suspicion. My hands didn't shake. They went cold. I followed one transfer to a vendor I didn't recognize. The name sounded legitimate. Corporate, boring. Exactly the kind of name designed not to draw attention. I searched our records. No contract. No invoices. No deliveries. Yet the payments kept coming. That was when the numbers stopped whispering and started screaming. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as pieces slowly aligned in my mind. This wasn't sloppy. This wasn't accidental. This was someone who understood the system well enough to exploit it. Someone who had access. Someone who signed the checks. Coleman's digital signature appeared again and again, smooth and familiar. The same signature I'd seen on birthday cards, loan documents, and school forms. Seeing it there authorizing money to disappear felt like discovering a stranger wearing my husband's face. I checked the timeline. 2 years. 2 full years of quiet extraction. Money siphoned carefully, patiently, as if he believed time itself would protect him. I did the math in my head and felt my chest tighten. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gone. I closed my eyes, letting the reality settle. This wasn't just a betrayal of a marriage. This was theft from my family, from my grandparents' legacy, from the employees who trusted us with their livelihoods. From me. I opened another file, then another. I traced the flow of money through accounts that branched like veins, all leading to places that had nothing to do with Rivers Cafe, personal accounts, shell companies, names that meant nothing until I noticed a pattern: luxury payments, hotels, flights, jewelry, expenses that told a story Coleman never bothered to tell me. While I balanced payroll and worried about rising costs, he had been funding a second life. I felt something twist inside me, not rage. Not yet, but clarity. Infidelity is painful. Crime is different. Infidelity breaks your heart. Crime threatens your future. I wasn't dealing with a cheating husband. I was living with a criminal. Footsteps creaked upstairs. I froze, my finger hovering over the trackpad. My heart finally kicked into motion, but the house settled again. Coleman turned in his sleep. I exhaled slowly and kept working. Documented everything. Dates, amounts, account numbers. I didn't rush. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes create warnings. I emailed encrypted copies to an address he didn't know existed. Ill-labeled files in ways only I would understand. Every detail mattered now. By dawn, my eyes burned and my back ached. But my mind was sharp. I shut the laptop and watched the sun rise through the kitchen window. The world outside looked the same. Inside me, everything had changed. That morning, Coleman talked about lawyers, about timelines, about how cooperative I was being. You're handling this better than I expected, he said, almost impressed. I smiled. If he only knew, each time he spoke, I listened not to his words, but to what he avoided. He never mentioned the cafe's finances anymore. Never offered details. Never asked if I had questions, because criminals fear curiosity more than confrontation. That evening, as he stepped out to take a call, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen before. Panic. Just for a second. Tight around the eyes, controlled but present. The kind of fear that belongs to someone who knows the truth, is dangerous if uncovered. That was the moment I accepted what had to come next. This wasn't about saving a marriage. This was about protecting a legacy, and I would need help. Professional help, because the numbers weren't just evidence anymore, they were witnesses, and they were ready to testify. The moment I read Jack Morris's report, everything I thought I knew collapsed into something darker and far more dangerous. I had expected confirmation. I had expected evidence. I had not expected the depth of the lie. The folder sat heavy in my hands, its weight far greater than paper should allow. Jack slid it across the table between us in a quiet downtown office, the kind of place designed for conversations that shouldn't be overheard. Before you read this, he said carefully, you need to understand something. I looked up at him. This wasn't impulsive, he continued. This was planned. Those words followed me as I opened the folder. The first pages documented the affair. 2 years, not a fling. Not a mistake. A structured relationship with routines, shared travel, and financial support. Hotel bookings under fake names. Flights paid through third-party accounts. Photos taken from a distance, Coleman's hand on another woman's back. His posture relaxed in ways I hadn't seen at home in years. I felt the ache then. Sharp and brief like a blade that only cuts once, but the affair wasn't the worst. It was the organization. The report detailed shell companies registered under Coleman's aliases. Clean paperwork, proper filings, nothing sloppy. Each company existed for one purpose: to move money without attracting attention. Money from Rivers, CAFE, acute. Money from my family. The bank accounts were spread across states, some overseas, each account layered behind another like doors inside doors. Jack's notes were precise, clinical, unforgiving. This level of separation, he had written, indicates awareness of criminal exposure. In simpler terms, Coleman knew exactly what he was doing. I turned the pages slowly, absorbing each detail. The names blurred together: corporations that never operated, vendors that never delivered, addresses that led to empty buildings. It was a maze designed to exhaust anyone who tried to follow it. But Jack had followed it. And now so had I. My marriage wasn't falling apart. It had never existed in the first place. The man I had shared a bed with was a role Coleman played. A character designed to keep me occupied while he built something else in the shadows. Every late night, every unexplained absence, every distracted conversation now had a shape, and it was ugly. I reached the final section of the report and stopped. Breathing. Projected exposure, federal jurisdiction, wire. Fraud. Embezzlement. Money laundering, not accusations. Conclusions. Jack had underlined one sentence and read, subject believes spouse is unaware of financial activities. I let out a quiet laugh that surprised even me. Not because it was funny, but because it was finished. I wasn't unaware anymore. That night, I sat alone in my car outside the house, the report resting in the passenger seat. The windows reflected my face back at me, calm but unfamiliar. I wondered how long Coleman had been able to look at me knowing he was stealing from the ground beneath my feet, long enough to believe he was untouchable. Inside, I moved carefully. I placed the report in a locked drawer beneath old family documents, exactly where he would never look. Criminals don't expect to be caught by people they underestimate. Over the next few days, I watched Coleman with new eyes. Every gesture felt rehearsed. Every smile calculated. When he talked about our children, it sounded sincere, but now I understood sincerity can be manufactured. The most disturbing realization wasn't that he had lied. It was how easily he had done it. Jack checked in regularly, short calls, secure messages. Each one reinforced the same truth. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't overreacting. The evidence was airtight. You have leverage, Jack told me during one call. More than you realize. Leverage, I had never wanted that word. In my marriage. But now it was the only thing protecting me. I started preparing not emotionally, but strategically. I adjusted my routines. I made backups of backups. I stopped reacting to Coleman altogether. The less I showed, the safer I became, because if there was one thing Jack had made clear, it was this: men who live double lives become dangerous when they realize the truth is slipping. Coleman still believed I was the silent woman who would walk away quietly, the wife who would trade dignity for peace. He was wrong. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning survival. And survival, I had learned, requires proof. I had to. My marriage was a lie, and I was holding the truth in my hands. The courtroom smelled like old paper and polished wood, neutral, indifferent, designed to absorb stories without remembering them. I sat beside my attorney, hands folded in my lap, my expression carefully empty. Across the aisle, Coleman Hart looked relaxed. Too relaxed. His suit was pressed, his posture confident, the quiet smile on his face telling anyone who cared to look that he believed this day belonged to him, and in many ways, it did. When the judge asked if we were prepared to move forward, Coleman's Lawyer answered without hesitation. They had proposals, agreements, clean solutions. Everything framed as reasonable, efficient, and fair. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room settle on me. My attorney glanced at me just briefly. She knew. The signal was subtle but enough. I agree, I said. The words landed heavier than I expected. I agreed to relinquish the house, the cars, operational control of River's Cafe. A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. It wasn't loud enough to be disrespectful, but it was there, the sound of surprise. People don't usually give up everything without a fight. Coleman didn't hide his reaction. He smiled. It wasn't wide or careless. It was controlled, satisfied. The smile of a man watching a door close behind someone else. As the judge confirmed the terms, Coleman leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. Small, defeated, finished. I kept my gaze forward. Inside, I counted. Every minute mattered, because what the courtroom didn't know was that this wasn't a loss. It was a pause. Walking out of that building felt surreal. Reporters hovered near the entrance, hungry for conflict that never came. Coleman's lawyers shook hands, already discussing timelines. Coleman himself leaned close and lowered his voice. You made the right choice, he said. This will be easier for everyone. I nodded. He believed he had just buried me. What he didn't understand was that I had just given him exactly what he wanted: control. So he would expose himself without restraint. Power makes people careless. Over the next few days, Coleman moved fast. He transferred accounts, restructured management, signed documents I was no longer required to see. He was expanding, confident that nothing stood in his way now. That confidence was useful. Every action he took after the ruling created new evidence, new transactions, new digital trails. Trails that no longer needed my access to be followed. I stayed quiet. I complied with deadlines. I vacated spaces. I packed up pieces of my life like they were disposable, but at night I worked with my attorney, carefully, methodically. We didn't rush filings. We waited for patterns, for repetition, for proof that the behavior Jack Morris had uncovered wasn't stopping, it was accelerating. People don't slow down when they think they've won, my attorney said. They get bold. She was right. Coleman's smile grew easier. He laughed more. He stopped checking his words around me. He talked openly about future plans, about selling off assets, about restructuring the cafe in ways that made my stomach turn. I listened. In the quiet moments, doubt tried to creep in. Doubt is loud when you give up things you love. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, wondering if surrender would cost me more than it gave me. But then I remembered the surrender would cost me more than it gave me. But then I remembered the report. The accounts. The signatures. And I remembered why I was doing this. The courtroom wasn't the battlefield. It was the distraction. The real work was happening elsewhere, behind screens, inside records, across jurisdictions. Every new transfer Coleman authorized strengthened the case against him. Every confident move tightened the net. He didn't know it yet, but the time he thought he'd taken from me was being used against him. By the end of the week, he stopped pretending to be considerate. He spoke to me like someone who had already erased me from his future. That was when I knew the timing was perfect. I hadn't lost in court. I had bought time. And time, when used correctly, can be more dangerous than any argument. Coleman Hart walked out of that courtroom believing he was free. I walked out knowing the clock had started. Part 5. The strike of the law. By the time Laura Bennett told me it was ready, I already knew there was no turning back. We met in her office early that morning, the city still half asleep outside the windows. The table between us was covered in folders, neatly labeled, cross-referenced, color-coded. Months of quiet work were reduced to paper and data. Proof with a pulse. Laura didn't smile. She never did when things were serious. We have everything, she said calmly. Timelines, transactions, intent. She slid one folder closer to me. Wire fraud. Another followed. Money laundering. Then the last one, embezzlement. Each word landed like a final verdict even before a judge ever spoke it. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore. This wasn't about divorce. This was federal. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I had imagined this moment in fragments, anger, relief, fear, but what I felt instead was stillness. The kind that comes when a storm finally breaks. And you're at least you've already survived the worst of it. Once we submit, Lara continued. Things will move fast. Agents will act without warning. I nodded. Coleman thrived on control, on preparation. On knowing the room before he walked into it. This time, the room was coming to him. The filing went through just after noon. I spent the afternoon pretending it was an ordinary day running errands, answering emails, living inside the performance I had perfected. Every hour that passed tightened the air around me. At 6:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Rivers, a man said when I answered. His voice was firm, professional. This is Special Agent Turner with the Federal Task Force. We're in position. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need details. Thank you, I said quietly. I hung up and sat down, my hands resting on my knees. Somewhere across town, Coleman Hart was about to learn the difference between confidence and immunity. The knock came less than 30 minutes later. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. Jack Morris filled in the gaps later, his voice low as he described it. Coleman had just finished dinner. He thought it was a courier. He opened the door without hesitation. 6 agents. Badges. A weren't thick enough to silence any argument. Coleman's first instinct wasn't denial. It was confusion. He kept repeating the same sentence. There's been a mistake. There hadn't. They read him his rights while neighbors watched through parted curtains. Phones lifted, whispers spreading. The world he had carefully divided into compartments collided all at once. At the office, they found what he hadn't had time to destroy. Hard drives, backup devices. Handwritten notes he thought were meaningless. Digital footprints he assumed were invisible. At the cafe, accounts were frozen mid-transfer. At the bank, the shell company unraveled like cheap thread. By the time Coleman was seated in the interrogation room, the smile was gone. I saw him later, not in person, but through glass and distance. His face looked older, smaller, the confidence stripped away, leaving behind a man who finally understood the cost of believing he was smarter than everyone else. When he asked for a lawyer, it was already too late. Lyra called me just before midnight. He broke, she said simply. I closed my eyes. Coleman hadn't screamed, he hadn't begged, he had just folded. The evidence was too clear. Too complete. There was nowhere to push, nowhere to hide. The silence he once used against me now worked against him. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. What I felt was release. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the truth to surface. It had surfaced, and it had teeth. That night, I stood by my window and watched police lights fade into the distance. Somewhere, Coleman Hart sat alone, finally forced to face the reality he thought he had. Outsmarted. He had taken my trust. He had taken my family's money. He had taken years of my life, but he had underestimated one thing. I was paying attention, and when the law struck, it struck clean. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And it was only the beginning of the aftermath. Part 6. One woman. One empire. The first time I unlocked the doors of Rivers Cafe again, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what this place meant. The sign above the entrance was the same one my grandfather had hung decades ago, slightly faded but still proud. For months, the cafe had existed in my mind as something distant, almost stolen from me. Now it was real again, solid, mine, legally, emotionally, completely. When the courts transferred control back to me, there was no celebration, no speeches. Just paperwork, signatures, and the quiet return of responsibility. Power doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in slowly, like something that knows it belongs. Inside, the case smelled like fresh coffee and history. Some of the staff were already there, standing awkwardly, unsure of what this moment meant for them. I saw relief in their eyes mixed with caution. They had lived through uncertainty, rumors, and sudden changes they never asked for. I didn't start with rules. I started with honesty. I know the last year hasn't been easy, I told them. You deserved stability. You deserved the truth. They listened, really listened. And for the first time, I spoke not as someone explaining, but as someone leading. I opened the books to them. Not every detail, but enough to show them I had nothing to hide. Transparency had been missing for too long, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding on secrets. From that day forward, Rivers Cafe wasn't just a business, it was a shared mission I promoted from within. Trained people who had been overlooked. Gave responsibility to those who had earned trust, not demanded it. I didn't rule by fear or distance. I showed up. Every morning, every rush. Every quiet afternoon. The community noticed. Customers came. Back not because of marketing, but because they felt the shift. The cafe felt alive again. Honest. Anchored. People. Talk when something changes for the better. Local artists asked to hang their work on our walls. Musicians offered to play on weekends. Schools reached out for fundraisers. Rivers Cafe became what it was always meant to be, a place that gave as much as it took. And in the middle of it all, it changed. too. I no longer questioned my instincts. I trusted them. The woman who once deferred decisions now made them without apology. I read contracts carefully. Asked the uncomfortable questions. Hired professionals who respected boundaries instead of crossing them. I stopped confusing kindness with weakness. There were moments when exhaustion crept in. Moments when the past tried to whisper doubts into my ear. But I had learned something powerful. I had survived betrayal. Running a business was easy compared to that. One afternoon, as I stood behind the counter watching the staff move in rhythm, I realized something that stopped me cold. I wasn't rebuilding what I lost. I was building something better. The empire wasn't the cafe alone. It was the culture, the trust, the sense of ownership people felt when they walked through those doors. I had given my staff a voice, and in return, they gave me loyalty. I had given the community space, and it gave me support, and I had permitted myself to evolve. Stronger, sharper, unapologetic, ally aware. Rivers Cafe no longer carried the weight of secrets. It carried purpose. When people asked me how I did it, how I recovered, how I rebuilt, I never gave them the version they expected. I didn't say courage, I didn't say resilience, I said clarity. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And once you reclaim yourself, nothing can own you again. I was no longer the silent woman. I was the woman who built an empire from truth, and this time, it was unshakable. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in quiet waves, some gentle, some unexpected, often when you think you've already moved on. I know this because even now, after everything that happened, I'm still healing. I wake up each morning as Naya Rivers, a mother, a business owner, a woman with a past she didn't choose and a future she's still shaping. The world sees strength when it looks at me now. What it doesn't see are the scars beneath it. Not wounds that bleed, but memories that tighten without warning. Motherhood changed after the truth came out, not because I love my children any less, but because love became layered with responsibility in ways I hadn't anticipated. Co-parenting with a man who once lived a double life requires vigilance, boundaries, clarity. I no longer assume intentions. I observe actions. That lesson cost me dearly. There are days when I watch my children laugh and feel a sharp ache for the innocence we lost along the way. Not theirs, mine. The belief that trust, once given, would be ignored simply because it was deserved. But life doesn't work that way. Trust, I've learned, is not a promise. It's a practice. Rebuilding it within myself and with others has been one of the hardest parts of this journey. I question more. I listen longer. I no longer confuse charm with character or familiarity with safety. And I didn't apologize for that. Some people mistake healing for forgetting. I remember everything. I remember the silence at the dinner table, the unease I ignored, the moments I convinced myself not to look too closely because I wanted peace more than truth. Healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning how to live with it without letting it lead you. There are nights when exhaustion settles in my bones, and the weight of being strong feels heavier than the pain ever did. Strength, after all, is often misunderstood. It's not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. I'm still learning how to rest without guilt, still learning how to accept help, still learning how to believe that stability doesn't have to be temporary. Rivers Cafe continues to thrive, but my identity no longer begins or ends there. I am more than what I rebuilt. I am more than what was taken from me. I am the woman who survived knowing the truth too late and acted anyway. People sometimes ask if I hate Coleman Hart. I don't single quotes hate would tie me to him in ways I refuse to allow. What I feel is distance. A clean, deliberate separation between who I was and who I am now. The chapter he occupied is closed, not because it was resolved perfectly, but because I chose not to live inside it anymore. My story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming. My voice when silence was mistaken for submission, reclaiming my future when the past tried to define it, reclaiming my power without needing permission. Scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you healed in a world that tried to tear you apart. And if there is one truth I carry forward, one lesson etched into everything I do, it is this. You don't have to announce your strength. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to rush. You're healing to make others comfortable. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is to serve quietly, rebuild intentionally, and walk forward without asking to be followed. I'm still healing, but I'm whole. And this time, my life belongs to me.